The air in the Superior Court of Fulton County was thick with the scent of stale coffee and expensive lies. I sat at the defendant table with my hands folded on top of the polished mahogany. My spine was straight. My face was a mask of calm. I wore a shade of ivory that I knew would irritate my mother-in-law. Across the aisle stood Terrence. He was my husband of 5 years, but today he looked like a stranger. He was preening like a peacock in a bespoke midnight blue suit that cost $5,000. I knew exactly how much it cost because I was the one who paid the American Express bill last month. He adjusted his silk tie and winked at his lawyer. His lawyer was a man named Cohen, who had a reputation for being a shark, but today he looked more like a hyena waiting for scraps. Terrence looked every inch the successful entrepreneur he pretended to be. He had the charm and the smile and the confidence of a man who had never worked a real day in his life. Behind him sat his cheering squad. There was his mother Bernice, who had always looked at me like I was the help. Next to her was his brother Darnell, who could barely hide his jealousy. And then there was Darnell's wife Tiffany. She was a woman whose smile never quite reached her eyes, especially when she looked at me. I could hear Tiffany whispering to Darnell loud enough for me to hear. Finally, someone is going to teach that girl a lesson about sharing. The proceedings began, and Cohen painted a picture of our marriage that was so distorted it was almost impressive. He described me as a cold and unfeeling workaholic who had abandoned her husband emotionally to pursue money. He claimed that while I was in the lab, Terrence was the one keeping the home fires burning. He claimed Terrence provided the emotional stability that allowed me to succeed. Then it was Terrence's turn to speak. He stood up and smoothed his jacket. He addressed the judge with a practiced solemnity. "Your Honor," he began. His voice was rich and deep. It was the same voice that had once charmed me into paying off his student loans. My wife is a brilliant woman. I have never denied that. But brilliance needs direction. She had the technical skills, but I had the vision. I was her muse. I was the one who told her to dream bigger. I sacrificed my own career as a venture capitalist to support her. I managed our lifestyle. I built our brand. I inspired the very technology that made Helix Innovations billions. He paused for effect and looked around the courtroom to ensure everyone was absorbing his performance. I deserve 50% of the marital assets plus spousal support for life. It is only fair that I finally get to enjoy the fruits of our labor. I intend to live the life I earned. I will finally live off her fortune. A ripple of laughter went through his side of the room. I saw Tiffany smirk and lean forward. She whispered to Bernice, "He is going to take her for everything she has." Bernice nodded, and her eyes gleamed with greed. They were already spending my money in their heads. They were planning vacations and renovations on my dime. They looked at me with triumph. They thought I was broken. They thought I was defeated. I did not interrupt. I did not object. I simply sat there. My lawyer looked at me and I gave him an almost imperceptible nod. It was time. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick yellow manila envelope. It was sealed and heavy. I stood up and my chair scraped slightly against the floor. The sound cut through the murmurs in the courtroom. "Your Honor," I said. My voice was steady and calm. "I have no desire to argue with my husband's storytelling abilities. He has always had a vivid imagination. However, before you consider his request for half of my company and lifetime alimony, I would like to submit this into evidence." Terrence frowned. Confusion flickered in his eyes. He looked at Cohen, who shrugged. They thought they had covered every base. They thought they had hidden every asset of his. They knew that Georgia was an equitable distribution state. They thought I was bluffing. I walked to the bench and handed the envelope to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Mercer. "Please check the date on the signature on page 18, Your Honor." I whispered just loud enough for the microphone to catch, and then compare it to the date on the photographs in Exhibit B. Judge Mercer was a stern woman who had seen every kind of divorce drama imaginable. She opened the envelope. She pulled out the stack of documents. The room was silent. The only sound was the rustling of paper as she turned the pages. Terrence shifted his weight. He looked uncomfortable for the first time. Tiffany and Darnell had stopped whispering. They stretched their necks to see what was happening. Judge Mercer found the page I had mentioned. She looked at it closely, and her eyes narrowed behind her glasses. Then she reached for the smaller stack of photographs clipped to the back of the document. She looked at the photo. She looked back at the document. Then she did something I had never seen a judge do in open court. She threw her head back and laughed. It was a dry and harsh bark of a laugh that echoed off the wood paneling. "Mr. Booker," the judge said, wiping a tear from her eye, "are you absolutely certain about the statement you just made regarding your unwavering support and your fidelity to your wife?" Terrence turned the color of a sheet. The confidence drained out of him. He was left looking small and terrified in his expensive suit. He knew in that moment. He knew that I knew. And he realized that the envelope on the judge's desk was not just paper. It was a guillotine. True story. My name is Simone. At 32 years old, I am the founder and CEO of Helix Innovations. I built a biotech empire from the ground up. But sitting in the Superior Court of Fulton County today, I was not a CEO. I was a woman watching the man she once loved realize he had just dug his own grave. To understand the sheer audacity of his claims in that courtroom, you have to understand where we started 5 years ago. I was not a CEO 5 years ago. I was a doctoral candidate living on ramen noodles and ambition. I spent 18 hours a day in a university laboratory that smelled of formaldehyde and desperation. Terrence was what he called a pre-revenue investor. That was a fancy way of saying he was unemployed with expensive taste. I remember the day the dynamic of our relationship was set in stone. It was not the day we married. It was the day he almost ruined my future before it even began. I had been saving every spare dollar for 2 years. I tutored undergraduates in biochemistry until my voice went hoarse. I ate instant soup for dinner 6 nights a week. I walked everywhere to save on bus fare. I had scraped together exactly $12,000. It was the tuition payment for my final year of doctoral research. It was the money that stood between me and the degree that would change my life. I came home one Tuesday evening exhausted and smelling of lab chemicals. I sat down at our wobbly kitchen table to pay the tuition bill online. I logged into our joint savings account. The balance on the screen blinked back at me. It read $0.42. My heart stopped. I thought I had been hacked. I thought it was a bank error. I refreshed the page. $0.42. Terrence walked in a moment later. He was wearing a new leather jacket that smelled of fresh hide. He looked at my pale face and the open laptop. He did not look guilty. He looked excited. "Babe," he said, "you are going to thank me." I saw an opportunity, and I took it. He explained that he had taken my tuition money, all $12,000 of it. He had put it into a new cryptocurrency called Lunar Coin. He told me his friend promised it would go to the moon. He told me we would turn that $12,000 into $100,000 by the weekend. He was beaming like he had just invented fire. I screamed. I cried. I told him that money was for my tuition. I told him the deadline was in 3 days. Terrence did not apologize. He got angry. He turned the tables on me with the precision of a master manipulator. "You are so small-minded, Simone," he shouted. "This is why you are always stressed. You do not have vision. I did this for us. I did this to build our future. I wanted to buy you a house. I wanted to take care of you. And this is how you treat me. You treat me like a thief when I am trying to be a provider." He made himself the victim. He made me feel guilty for caring about the money I had earned with my own sweat. 2 days later, Lunar Coin crashed. The value went to zero. My $12,000 vanished into the digital ether. Terrence cried then. He sat on the floor and wept. But he was not crying for me. He was crying because he had lost his chance to look rich. He held on to my legs and begged me not to leave him. He told me he was worthless without me. He told me I was the only good thing in his life. I should have left him. Any sane woman would have packed her bags. But I was young, and I was in love, and I was stupid. I believed him. I forgave him. I went to the dean's office and begged for a payment extension. Then I took on 2 extra jobs. I worked the graveyard shift at a 24-hour diner serving greasy eggs to drunk college students. I took a weekend job catering weddings for the wealthy elite of Atlanta. I watched rich brides dance in gowns that cost more than my entire education while my feet bled in cheap black shoes. While I worked 80 hours a week to replace the money he stole, Terrence did nothing. He said he was too depressed to work. He said he needed to network to find his next big break. He used the little money we had left to buy drinks for potential partners at upscale bars. He drove around the city in a leased sedan that I paid for. He played the role of the big shot while I wiped tables. He called it laying the groundwork. I called it survival. But I was too exhausted to fight him. Then came the breakthrough. My research into gene therapy for rare autoimmune diseases caught the attention of the right people. I founded Helix Innovations 3 months after I defended my dissertation. The valuation skyrocketed faster than anyone predicted. Within 18 months, my proprietary gene editing technology was licensed by 3 major pharmaceutical giants. Suddenly, the girl who served eggs was the woman on the cover of Forbes. I was a millionaire many times over. Terrence's reaction was immediate and predictable. He did not congratulate me on the sleepless nights or the scientific breakthrough. He congratulated himself on his investment in me. He quit his imaginary job as an investor the very next day. He printed business cards that read, Terrence Booker, Director of Brand Strategy for Helix Innovations. Despite having 0 experience in branding or biology, his strategy mostly involved booking VIP tables at clubs and buying suits that cost more than my first car. He told everyone who would listen that he was the brains behind the operation. He told them I was just the technician. He claimed he gave me the confidence to start the company. He brought his family along for the ride. The Booker clan descended on my success like locusts. Bernice and Darnell and Tiffany treated my bank account like a community chest. Terrence gave them access to everything. He handed Bernice a supplementary Black American Express card linked to my primary account. She used it to buy hats and church suits and dinners for her friends. Darnell used my connections to get into exclusive golf clubs where he pretended to be a wealthy heir. Tiffany treated my home like a hotel and my closet like a boutique. I let it happen. I was so busy running a billion-dollar company that I just wanted peace at home. I paid the bills to keep them quiet. I paid for their silence. I paid for the illusion of a happy family. I thought if I gave them enough, they would eventually be satisfied. I thought if I lifted them up, they would respect me. I was wrong. They did not respect the hand that fed them. They wanted to bite it off. Terrence stopped asking for permission. He started demanding. He bought a G-Wagon without telling me. He booked first-class trips to Miami for his boys. He spent $10,000 a night on bottle service to impress strangers. And when I asked him about it, he would say the same thing he said 5 years ago. I am building our brand, Simone. You handle the science. Let me handle the image. Image is everything. He was right about one thing. Image was everything to him. He had crafted an image of a wealthy and powerful patriarch, but it was a house of cards built on my back. And he had forgotten that I was the one holding the foundation together. He had forgotten that the girl who worked the graveyard shift to clean up his messes had grown into a woman who could buy and sell his entire existence. He mistook my silence for weakness. He mistook my patience for submission. He thought the well would never run dry. He thought he could steal from me forever, just like he stole my tuition money. He was about to find out that Helix Innovations was not the only thing I had built. I had built a tolerance for pain and a capacity for cold and calculated strategy. The girl who cried over lost tuition money was gone. The woman sitting in the courtroom was someone else entirely, and she was done paying for his mistakes. The dining room of our 10,000-square-foot mansion was cold. It was not a temperature issue. The thermostat was set to a comfortable 72 degrees. The coldness came from the people sitting around the mahogany table. Sunday dinner was a mandatory ritual for the Booker family. It was a performance of wealth and unity that I was forced to bankroll. I sat at the foot of the table. Terrence sat at the head. It was a symbolic arrangement that perfectly illustrated our marriage. I provided the foundation, and he took the credit. The air smelled of roasted lamb and expensive perfume. Bernice sat to my right. She was wearing a Chanel suit that I knew was older than I was. She adjusted her pearl necklace and looked at me with a critical eye. Next to her sat Tiffany. She was picking at her food and looking bored. Darnell was busy pouring himself another glass of my vintage Cabernet Sauvignon. They called themselves Old Money. They prided themselves on their lineage. They traced their ancestors back to prominent doctors and civil rights leaders in Atlanta. They believed they were the aristocracy of black society. But the only thing old about their money was that it was gone long ago. They had status but no liquidity. I had liquidity, but in their eyes I had no status. To them, I was new money. I was loud, I was unrefined, I was a checkbook with a pulse. Tiffany broke the silence. She swirled her wine glass and looked pointedly at my head. I was wearing my hair in a natural twist-out style. It was thick and coiled and healthy. I loved my hair. It was a symbol of my heritage and my freedom. But to Tiffany, it was an offense. "You know Simone," she said. Her voice was dripping with fake concern. "I really think you should consider a silk press or maybe a sew-in. That wild look is just so aggressive. It screams struggle. You are a CEO now. You should look the part. You do not want people to think you just walked out of the jungle." She patted her own hair. It was a bone-straight wig that cost $2,000. I knew the price because Terrence had asked me for the money last week, claiming it was for a car repair. She looked at me with a smug superiority. She believed that buying hair made her better than the woman who grew it. I placed my fork down slowly. "My hair is clean and professional, Tiffany," I said. My voice was calm. "It is natural." Bernice made a sound of disapproval in her throat. It was a sharp, clicking noise. "Natural is just a polite word for unkempt," she said. "A Booker woman should look polished. She should look effortless. But I suppose we cannot expect too much. Upbringing is everything." I felt my jaw tighten. I knew where this was going. It was their favorite game. It was the game where they reminded me that I did not belong. "Your parents were good people." "I am sure," Bernice continued. She sliced her lamb with surgical precision. "But let us be honest, dear. They were simple. Your father was a carpenter. Your mother was a maid. They worked with their hands. They served people. That kind of servitude is in your DNA. It is hard to shake off the scent of blue-collar labor. You hustle, you grind, you work so hard to prove you belong. Old money does not have to try. We just are. My parents were dignified people. They paid their bills on time. They never took a dime from anyone. They raised a daughter who built a billion-dollar company. I wanted to scream this across the table. I wanted to tell her that her precious lineage did not pay for the lamb she was eating. I wanted to tell her that her aristocratic status was being subsidized by the daughter of a maid. I looked at Terrence. I waited for him to speak. I waited for him to defend me. I waited for him to say that my parents were heroes who sacrificed everything for my education. I waited for him to tell his mother to stop insulting his wife. Terrence looked up from his plate. He wiped his mouth with a linen napkin. He looked at his mother and then he looked at me. He laughed. It was a soft chuckle that shattered my heart. "Come on, Mom," he said. "Do not be too hard on her. Simone knows she is lucky. She knows she hit the jackpot when she married into the Booker family. We are giving her class. We are giving her a name that actually means something in this city. She is grateful." "Aren't you, babe?" He winked at me. He actually winked. He expected me to smile. He expected me to nod and agree that I was a peasant who had been rescued by a prince. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. I looked at their faces. Bernice looked smug. Tiffany looked triumphant. Terrence looked arrogant. It was a moment of absolute clarity. It was the drop of water that caused the dam to break. I realized in that second that they did not love me. They did not even like me. They tolerated me because I paid for the lifestyle they felt entitled to. I was not a wife. I was not a daughter-in-law. I was not a sister. I was an ATM machine. I was a resource. They were mining until it ran dry. They despised my origin, but they loved my money. They mocked my labor, but they feasted on its fruits. I picked up my wine glass. My hand was steady. I took a sip. The expensive wine tasted like vinegar. I forced a smile onto my face. It was a cold and brittle thing. "You are right, Terrence," I said. I am learning so much from this family. I was learning exactly who my enemies were. And they were sitting right at my dinner table. 2 weeks after the incident at the dinner table, Terrence came to me with his grand vision. He barged into my home office while I was reviewing clinical trial data for a new autoimmune drug. He was holding a single sheet of notebook paper with a few bullet points scrawled on it in blue ink. He looked manic. His eyes were wide and he smelled faintly of expensive cologne and desperation. "Babe," he said. He began pacing the room like a caged tiger. "I have been thinking. Helix Innovations is great. You have done a good job. But we need to diversify. We need to build the Booker brand. I want to launch Booker Media Group. I am going to manage influencers and produce content and run the nightlife scene in Atlanta. I just need a seed round. I need $500,000. I looked at the piece of paper he slammed onto my desk. He called it a business plan. I called it a ransom note. It listed expenses like leasing a penthouse office in Midtown and buying a company vehicle, which was specifically listed as a customized G-Wagon. There was a line item for a travel budget to scout talent in Miami. There was a budget for client dinners at five-star restaurants. There was no revenue model. There was no market analysis. There was no strategy for client acquisition. It was just a shopping list for a Playboy lifestyle disguised as a corporation. He wanted $500,000 to play dress-up. I looked at him and I saw the entitlement radiating off him like heat waves. He expected me to write the check without question. He expected me to fund his delusion, just like I paid for his suits and his mother's mortgage. "And I need you to meet my team," he said. He walked to the door and waved someone in. "Come in, Bianca." The woman who walked into my office was not a business partner. She was a weapon. Her name was Bianca. She was 24 years old with skin the color of caramel and hair that tumbled down her back in perfect waves. She was wearing a dress that was a fraction too short for a business meeting, but perfect for a seduction. She was exactly the kind of woman Terrence had always idolized. She was the living embodiment of the status symbol he desperately wanted to acquire. She walked into the room, and the atmosphere shifted instantly. She did not look at me with respect. She did not look at me with fear. She looked at me with a calculated appraisal, Mrs. "Booker," she chirped. She extended a manicured hand. "It is such an honor. Terrence talks about you all the time. He says you are basically a machine in the boardroom. A machine, not a genius, not a visionary. A machine, useful and cold and devoid of humanity." I shook her hand. Her grip was limp, but her eyes were sharp. "Welcome to our home, Bianca," I said. My voice was neutral. Terrence beamed. He put a hand on the small of her back. It was a gesture that was too familiar. It was a gesture of possession. "Bianca is going to be my executive assistant," he explained. "She has incredible connections in the industry. She gets it. She understands the vision." Bianca smiled. She turned away from me and began to walk around my office. This was my sanctuary. This was where I built an empire. But she walked through it like she was touring a property she intended to buy. She ran her fingers along the edge of my mahogany desk. She paused in front of the limited edition Basquiat print hanging on the wall. Her eyes lingered on it greedily. She knew what it was worth. Then she looked through the open door into my walk-in closet, which was visible from the office. Her eyes widened. She saw the rows of designer shoes. She saw the collection of Hermes Birkin bags lined up on the top shelf. She stared at them with a hunger that made my skin crawl. She was not just admiring them, she was counting them. She was mentally trying them on. She was imagining how they would look on her arm when she eventually pushed me out of the picture. "I love your taste," she said. Her voice was dripping with envy. "That orange crocodile bag is stunning." I have always said that a woman is defined by her accessories. Terrence has promised that Booker Media Group is going to be huge. Maybe one day I will have a closet like this. She looked at Terrence and giggled. It was a sound like glass breaking. Terrence laughed with her. "You deserve it, babe," he said. Then he caught himself. "I mean, we all deserve success. That is what this company is about." I sat there and watched them. They were standing in my house and planning how to spend my money. Bianca was not an employee. She was a replacement. She was the younger and flashier model that the Booker family wanted. She was the upgrade, and Terrence was the fool who thought he was the one in control. He looked back at me. "So what do you say, Simone? $500,000. It is an investment in our legacy." I looked at the handwritten note. I looked at the husband who despised me. I looked at the mistress who wanted to be me. "That sounds ambitious, Terrence," I said. I kept my voice even. I think it could be a great move for us. I opened my desk drawer. I did not pull out a checkbook. I pulled out a stack of legal documents. I placed the stack of documents on the desk between us. It was a mountain of legal jargon printed on heavy bond paper. The stack was 3 inches thick. It was a fortress of paper designed to intimidate the lazy and the illiterate. I knew Terrence fell into both categories when it came to business. But since Helix Innovations is a publicly traded company now, and my assets are tied up in regulatory scrutiny, I have to follow strict compliance protocols for any large personal withdrawals. I lied smoothly. The lie tasted sweet on my tongue. I tapped the stack with a manicured fingernail. "I need you to sign these," I explained. "It is just standard banking procedures and investment disclosures and liability waivers. It basically tells the board that this is a personal investment and not a conflict of interest. Once these are signed, the bank will release the funds immediately." Terrence looked at the stack and sighed. He rolled his eyes. It was the reaction of a petulant child who was being asked to clean his room before he could play with his toys. "God, Simone, why do you always have to make everything so complicated with paperwork?" He groaned. "Can you not just write the check? You are the CEO. You own the company. Just give me the money." I shrugged and feigned helplessness. "My hands are tied, babe. The board is watching every penny. The Securities and Exchange Commission is watching every transaction. Just sign the tabs, and you get your money." He sat down in the leather chair opposite me. He was huffing with annoyance. He did not pick up the documents to read them. He did not call a lawyer. He did not even ask what the acronyms meant. He just grabbed a Mont Blanc pen from my desk cup and started signing where the yellow sticky tabs indicated. He was signing his name so fast it was just a scribble. He was bored. He was arrogant. He thought I was too in love with him to ever hurt him. He thought I was the desperate wife trying to buy his affection. He had no idea he was sitting across from an executioner. I watched him turn the pages. My heart was pounding against my ribs like a war drum. He flipped past the indemnity clause. He flipped past the non-disclosure agreement, and then he reached page 42. The header was in bold font, but his eyes glazed right over it. Post-nuptial agreement regarding asset forfeiture and marital conduct. This was it. This was the trap. Clause 18 was buried in the middle of the paragraph. It was written in dense legalese, but the meaning was lethal. It stated clearly and irrevocably that if Party B, who was Terrence, was found to be engaging in extramarital affairs or financial fraud against Party A, who was me, then Party B would forfeit all rights to marital assets and alimony and future earnings. It further stated that any debt incurred by Party B would remain the sole responsibility of Party B. It was a kill switch for our marriage, and he was holding the detonator. "Just here," I said. I pointed to the signature line. My finger was steady. "And initial here." He scribbled his initials. Then he signed his full name at the bottom. Terrence Booker. The ink was dark and permanent. He closed the folder and pushed it back toward me. "There," he said. He looked at me with a mixture of triumph and disdain. "Done. Now where is my money?" I opened my checkbook. I wrote a check for $500,000 from my personal account. I tore it out of the book. The ripping sound was sharp in the quiet office. I handed it to him. He stared at the number. His eyes lit up with greed. He kissed the check. Then he leaned over the desk and gave me a quick and dismissive peck on the cheek. It was a cold kiss. It was the kind of kiss you give a distant relative you do not like. "You are the best, babe," he said. He was already standing up and checking his reflection in the glass of the window. "Booker Media Group is going to take over the world. Do not wait up for me tonight. I have to go scout locations for the office. I want to hit the ground running." He grabbed his car keys and walked out of the office whistling. He was holding $500,000 in his hand, but he had just signed away a fortune worth hundreds of millions. He walked out the door, thinking he was a tycoon. He had no idea he was already a dead man walking. I waited until I heard the front door slam. I waited until I heard the roar of his engine fading down the driveway. He was not going to scout locations. He was going to pick up Bianca. He was going to celebrate his victory with the woman he intended to replace me with. I picked up the document he had just signed. I turned to page 42. I traced his signature with my finger. Then I picked up my phone and called my lawyer, Richard. "File it," I said. He signed. "It is done." I knew Bianca was not just a pretty face with a lack of moral compass. She was a corporate shark in training. I had done my due diligence the moment she walked into my office. A simple background check revealed what Terrence was too blind to see. Her last name was Sterling. She was the estranged daughter of Marcus Sterling. He was the CEO of Apex Biocorp. They were my biggest competitor in the gene therapy space. Apex Biocorp had been trying to replicate my results for years without success. They were burning through capital and patience. They were desperate for a win. Bianca did not just want my husband, she wanted my empire, and she had found the perfect pawn to get it for her. The confirmation came 3 days later. Terrence had invited her over for what he called a late-night strategy session for Booker Media Group. They were drinking wine in the living room and laughing loudly at jokes that were not funny. I excused myself to go upstairs and take a bath. I wanted to wash the stench of their disrespect off my skin. I came back downstairs an hour later wearing a silk robe. The living room was empty. The wine glasses were still on the coffee table, leaving wet rings on the wood. I heard a floorboard creak down the hallway. It came from the direction of my home office. I moved silently. My bare feet made no sound on the plush runner. The door to my office was ajar. A sliver of light spilled out into the dark hallway. I peered through the crack. Bianca was standing behind my desk. She was not looking at the Basquiat print anymore. She was hovering over my open laptop. The screen was glowing blue against her face. Her hand was reaching for the trackpad. She was trying to wake the computer from sleep mode. She was trying to bypass the biometric lock. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a heavy thud. "Can I help you find something, Bianca?" My voice was low and dangerous. Bianca jumped. She spun around so fast she knocked a crystal paperweight off the desk. It hit the floor with a dull thud, but did not break. She pressed a hand to her chest. Her eyes were wide with feigned surprise. "Oh, Mrs. Booker," she gasped. "You scared me. I was just looking for the bathroom. Terrence said it was down this hall. I got a little turned around. This house is just so big." I leaned against the doorframe. I crossed my arms over my chest. I looked at her with a gaze that could strip paint from a wall. "The bathroom is in the foyer, Bianca. It is in the complete opposite direction. And usually when guests are lost, they do not try to access the host's encrypted laptop." She laughed. It was a nervous and high-pitched sound. "Do not be silly. I was just looking for a light switch. It is so dark in here. I would never touch your computer. I know how important your work is." She was lying. I knew it. She knew it. But she played the part of the innocent ditz perfectly. She smoothed her dress and walked toward me. "I should get back to Terrence," she said. "He is waiting for me on the patio. He has such great ideas for the launch party." She brushed past me. She smelled of my husband's cologne and deceit. She walked away thinking she had fooled me. She thought I was just a jealous wife guarding her territory. She was wrong. I realized in that moment that the stakes had changed. This was not just a marriage crisis. This was corporate warfare. She was trying to steal the intellectual property that was worth billions. She was trying to take the legacy I had built from nothing and hand it to her father on a silver platter. That night I did not sleep. I waited until Terrence was snoring. He was passed out from too much wine and self-satisfaction. I slipped out of bed and went down to my office. I sat in the chair where Bianca had stood hours before. I was a tech CEO. Data was my currency, and I needed to know exactly what I was dealing with. I pulled up the administrative access for our family cellular plan. I installed a mirror software on his phone. It was a program designed for monitoring corporate espionage, but it was perfectly suited for marital treachery. It would replicate every text message and every call log and every photo he took directly to a secure server that only I could access. Then I accessed his laptop remotely. I installed a keystroke logger. I linked the microphone on his devices to my private cloud. I turned his digital life into a glass house. I sat back in my chair and watched the installation bar fill up. 90%, 95%, 100%, complete. I had him. I had ears in his pocket and eyes on his screen. If Bianca wanted to play spy games, she was about to learn that she was playing against a grandmaster. I closed my laptop and smiled. The hunt was on. My 32nd birthday was supposed to be a milestone. I had cleared my entire schedule for the afternoon, which was a logistical miracle considering we were in the middle of a merger negotiation at Helix Innovations. I told my executive assistant to cancel the board preparation meeting. I drove home with a small flicker of hope in my chest, thinking that perhaps Terrence had remembered. Maybe the Cold War in our house would thaw for just one night. I imagined a quiet dinner, perhaps just the two of us sharing a bottle of wine without his mother hovering in the background like a vulture. I wanted to believe that somewhere beneath the layers of entitlement, the man I married still existed. I pulled into the driveway at 4 p.m, but the house was dark and empty. The silence was heavy. I checked my phone. There was a text message from Terrence that had come in 10 minutes ago. It read simply, "Babe, I am stuck in an emergency shareholder meeting for Booker Media Group. It is going to be a late one. Do not wait up. Go to sleep. Happy birthday." I stared at the screen. Shareholder meeting. It was a lie so lazy it was almost insulting. His company did not have shareholders. It barely had a bank account that I did not fund. I felt the familiar sting of disappointment, but this time it was accompanied by a cold curiosity. I opened the tracking app I had installed on his phone. The little blue dot was not at his rented office space downtown. It was 40 miles north at Lake Lanier. He was at the marina. I did not take off my heels. I did not change out of my ivory power suit. I got back into my car and drove north. The traffic was brutal, but my mind was clear. I needed to see it. I needed to know what was so important that he would leave his wife alone on her birthday. When I arrived at the marina, the sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of violet and bruised orange. I parked my car in the shadows away from the main lot and walked toward the docks. I did not have to look hard to find him. The largest yacht in the slip was lit up like a Christmas tree. It was a 100-foot vessel that cost $15,000 a day to charter. I knew the price because my American Express card had sent me a notification for a boat rental charge 2 days ago, which Terrence had explained away as a venue deposit for a client launch party. I took out my camera with the telephoto lens and steadied it against a piling. Through the viewfinder, the scene came into sharp focus. The deck was crowded with people. I saw Darnell holding a cigar and laughing at something Terrence said. I saw Tiffany wearing a white dress that looked suspiciously bridal while sipping champagne. And there in the center of it all was Bernice. My mother-in-law, who usually complained about her bad hip, was dancing. She was holding a glass of champagne in one hand, and the other arm was wrapped affectionately around Bianca. Bianca was glowing. She was wearing a tiara, a literal diamond tiara. And behind her, strung up between the masts of the yacht, was a massive banner. The letters were bold and red. "Happy 25th birthday, Bianca, to our future." They were not just celebrating her birthday. They were celebrating her place in their family. They were giving her the party they had never given me. They were spending my money to toast the woman who was helping my husband destroy me. I watched as Bernice squeezed Bianca's shoulder. I zoomed in to read her lips. "You are the daughter I always wanted," she said. "You have such grace. You fit right in with the Booker legacy." I felt a physical blow to my chest. Bernice had never hugged me like that. She had never looked at me with anything other than disdain. But here she was fawning over the daughter of my rival. She was welcoming the parasite into the host because the parasite wore designer clothes and knew how to flatter her ego. I watched as Terrence stepped forward. He looked handsome and charismatic the way he always did when he was spending someone else's fortune. He raised a glass and the music died down. I could not hear his words over the water, but I saw the way he looked at her. It was a look of adoration. It was a look of promise. He handed her a small velvet box. It was not the engagement ring yet. I knew that was saved for the wedding. But it was jewelry. It was probably diamond earrings paid for with the refund from a fake business expense. Then the first firework exploded overhead. A shower of gold and red sparks rained down on the lake. Under the light of the pyrotechnics, Terrence pulled Bianca into his arms. He dipped her low and kissed her. It was a passionate claiming kiss. The family cheered. Bernice clapped her hands in delight. Tiffany raised her glass high. They were a perfect and happy family united in their deception. I snapped the photo. The shutter clicked rapidly, capturing every frame of the betrayal. The kiss, the family's applause, the banner, the expensive champagne. I had it all. I lowered the camera and checked the date on the display screen. October 15th. I felt a slow smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of joy. It was the smile of a predator who had just watched the prey walk into the trap. Today was October 15th. This morning at 9 o'clock, Terrence had signed the post-nuptial agreement. He had signed a legally binding document pledging his fidelity and financial transparency in exchange for the loan. He had signed away his rights to my fortune on the very same day he was celebrating his plan to steal it. He had committed adultery less than 12 hours after signing a contract stating that adultery would leave him with nothing. I looked at them one last time. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The pain was there, deep and dull, but it was buried under a layer of ice. I did not scream. I did not march down the dock and cause a scene. That is what the old Simone would have done. The new Simone simply turned around and walked back to her car. I had the evidence. I had the timeline. And now I had the motivation to burn their world to the ground. I knew that Bianca was not operating alone. She was a guided missile launched by her father, Marcus Sterling. Apex Biocorp had been bleeding money for 3 years, trying to crack the code on stable gene editing vectors. They were desperate. Bianca had clearly whispered poison into Terrence's ear. She told him that he needed to bring something to the table to truly be part of her world. She told him that her father would welcome him with open arms if he could just provide a little insight into what Helix Innovations was working on. She probably called it a dowry. I called it corporate espionage. I set the stage with the precision of a Broadway director. It was a Tuesday morning. I announced loudly at breakfast that I was bringing the master files for Project Ether home. I complained that the secure archives at the office were undergoing maintenance, and I did not trust the temporary servers. I told Terrence that Project Ether was the holy grail. I told him it was the formula that would secure our dominance for the next 20 years. I watched his eyes light up over his coffee cup. He tried to hide it behind a mask of indifference, but I saw the greed. He asked me casually where I would keep such important documents. I told him they would be in the wall safe in my home office. I told him I was the only one with the code. I left for the office at 8 o'clock. I left a single thick folder inside the safe. It was labeled Project Ether Confidential. The cover was stamped with red ink that read, Top Secret Proprietary Formula. I drove down the street and parked my car around the corner. I pulled up the live feed from the hidden cameras on my iPad. I waited. It took exactly 45 minutes. I watched as Terrence's car pulled back into the driveway. He had circled the block to make sure I was gone. He entered the house. He did not go to the kitchen. He did not go to the bedroom. He went straight to my office. He looked nervous. He was sweating through his linen shirt. His eyes darted around the room as if he expected the walls to attack him. He locked the office door behind him. He thought he was being stealthy. He had no idea he was the star of his own reality show. He walked to the large abstract painting on the far wall. He swung it open to reveal the safe. The safe was a high-security biometric model, but I had enabled the keypad backup just for today. I had changed the code that morning. I knew Terrence. I knew his ego. And I knew his obsession. He reached for the keypad. He paused. I watched him take a deep breath. He typed in 4 digits, 1015, my birthday. The safe beeped a harsh error tone. The light flashed red. He frowned. He wiped his sweaty palms on his pants. He tried again. 0812, Bernice's birthday. The safe beeped again. Error. He stood there for a moment. He looked frustrated. He muttered a curse word under his breath. He stared at the keypad. Then a slow smile spread across his face. It was a look of sickening realization. He thought he had cracked the code because he was a genius. He thought he knew how my mind worked. He reached out and typed in 6 digits, 042299, April 22nd, 1999. It was Bianca's birthday. The light on the safe turned green. The heavy door swung open with a soft hiss. He let out a low laugh. It was a sound of pure triumph. He thought I had used that code because I suspected something. He thought I was playing a game with him. He had no idea that I had programmed that code specifically because I knew it was the only set of numbers he cared about anymore. It was not a lucky guess. It was a behavioral prediction, and he had walked right into it. He reached inside and pulled out the thick stack of documents. His hands shook as he laid the papers out on my desk. He pulled out his phone. He began snapping pictures. He photographed page after page of complex chemical structures and gene sequencing data. He was thorough. He photographed every footnote and every diagram and every falsified projection. He thought he was holding the future of medicine in his hands. He thought he was stealing $1 billion cure that would buy his way into the country club set forever. What he was actually stealing was a fabrication I had spent 3 nights composing. The formula in those pages was not a cure for anything. It was a chemical dead end. It was a volatility trap. If the scientists at Apex Biocorp tried to synthesize that compound based on my notes, the reaction would be unstable. It would not just fail. It would result in a catastrophic pressure spike that would destroy their equipment and likely blow out the windows of their laboratory. It was a poison pill wrapped in a golden wrapper. I watched him finish photographing the last page. He put the documents back in the safe. He closed the door and wiped the keypad with his sleeve as if that would erase his crime. He looked at the phone in his hand like it was the Holy Grail. He started typing a text message. Thanks to the mirror software on his phone, I saw the message appear on my screen at the exact same moment he sent it. He sent the text to Bianca. Got it. He typed, "We are rich, baby. Your dad is going to love this." I took a screenshot of the text. I saved the video file from the hidden camera to 3 different secure cloud servers. He slipped out of the room, leaving everything exactly as he found it. He thought he had committed the perfect crime. He thought he was invisible. He did not look up at the smoke detector on the ceiling. He did not see the tiny lens of the 4K camera hidden inside it. He did not know that the little blinking red light was not a sensor, but a recording indicator. I had him. I had him on breaking and entering. I had him on corporate theft. And I had him proving that his loyalty belonged entirely to a woman who was using him to steal from his wife. The trap was sprung. He was already dead. He just did not know it yet. The annual Helix Innovations Charity Gala was the event of the season. It was a black tie affair where the elite of Atlanta gathered to pat themselves on the back for their philanthropy. It was also the night I had chosen to make my public stand. I wore a custom white gown. It was sleek and architectural. It was a symbol of purity and power designed by a French couturier I admired. I stood at the entrance of the ballroom greeting senators and tech moguls while playing the role of the perfect hostess. Then Terrence arrived. He did not walk in alone. He walked in with Bianca on his arm. She was wearing a red dress that screamed for attention. It was cut so low it was a scandal in itself. He introduced her to everyone as the Vice President of Strategy for Booker Media Group. It was a title that did not exist for a company that was a sham. Behind them trailed the circus. Bernice was wearing a feathered hat that blocked the view of anyone standing behind her. Darnell was in a suit that was 2 sizes too small. Tiffany was wearing a dress covered in sequins that looked like a disco ball had exploded. They were loud. They were obnoxious. They were exactly what they accused me of being. They made a beeline for the bar and then circled the room like sharks looking for blood. I watched as they cornered my investors, telling loud stories about Terrence's genius and my lucky break. I maintained my composure. I smiled for the cameras and shook hands, but my eyes never left them. The disaster happened during the cocktail hour. I was speaking with a prominent reporter from the Atlanta Journal-Constitution about our new pediatric wing initiative. Tiffany approached me holding a glass of red wine filled to the brim. She swayed slightly, feigning intoxication, though I knew she was stone-cold sober. "Oh, Simone," she called out. Her voice carried over the jazz quartet. "You look so stiff. Loosen up a little." She stumbled forward. It was a performance worthy of a reality television award. Her hand jerked, and the entire contents of the glass splashed across the front of my white gown. The dark red stain bloomed like a gunshot wound on the pristine fabric. The liquid soaked through to my skin and dripped onto the marble floor. The room gasped. Cameras flashed rapidly, capturing my humiliation in high definition. I stood there while the wine ruined a $20,000 dress. Oops, Tiffany giggled. She covered her mouth with a hand that glittered with fake diamonds. My bad. I guess white was not your color anyway. Terrence stepped forward. He did not offer me a napkin. He did not reprimand his sister-in-law. He put an arm around Tiffany's shoulder and looked at the reporter with a charming shrug. "You have to forgive my wife," he said. His voice was full of mock indulgence. "She is so clumsy. She is always in the wrong place at the wrong time. Honey, maybe you should go change. You are embarrassing yourself." The crowd murmured. I saw pity in their eyes. I saw judgment. They saw a woman who could not control her own family. They saw a woman being disrespected by her own husband. I did not cry. I did not run away. I looked at Terrence. I looked at Tiffany smirking behind her hand. I looked at Bianca clinging to Terrence's other arm like a trophy. I unclasped my evening bag and pulled out a silk handkerchief. I dabbed at the stain not to clean it, but to acknowledge it. Then I turned to the reporter. "Please excuse me for a moment," I said. My voice was steady. "I have an announcement to make." I walked to the stage. The wine stain was a scarlet letter on my chest, but I wore it like armor. I took the microphone from the master of ceremonies. The feedback whined and the room fell silent. "Good evening, everyone," I said. My voice was amplified, clear and commanding. "Thank you all for coming. As you can see, I have had a little accident. But in life, as in science, it is not the mistake that defines us, but how we recover from it." I looked out at the crowd, finding Terrence's eyes. He was smiling. He thought I was about to apologize. He thought I was about to retreat. "Tonight we are here to raise money for medical research," I continued. "But recent events have brought another cause to my attention. It is a cause that is very personal to me." I paused, letting the tension build. "Tonight I am pledging $1 million of my personal funds to the Atlanta Shelter for Women, specifically to their program supporting victims of domestic and financial abuse." The room erupted in applause. Terrence's smile vanished instantly. His face went slack. "I am doing this," I said. My voice dropped to a register of deadly seriousness, "because I believe that no woman should ever have to tolerate disrespect in her own home. No woman should have to pay for her own humiliation. And no woman should ever be made to feel small by people who are too weak to stand in her light." I stared directly at Terrence. His face was a mask of confusion and dawning fear. He realized in that moment that the check I had just pledged was money he thought was his. It was the money he intended to use to buy his customized G-Wagon. It was the operating capital for his fake company, and I had just given it away to strangers on live television. I raised my glass of water in a toast. To resilience, I said, and to cleaning up messes. I drank. The crowd cheered. And Terrence Booker stood there realizing for the first time that the stain on my dress was nothing compared to the stain I was about to put on his life. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office, but I was not admiring the view. I was looking at the glowing screen of my laptop. The coffee on my desk had gone cold, but my focus was burning hot. It was 8 in the morning the day after the gala. Most of the city was still waking up or nursing hangovers from the night before, but I was already at war. I had logged into our primary banking portal. It was the central nervous system of our financial life. For 5 years, I had given Terrence free rein. I had added him as a supplementary cardholder on my Black American Express. I had given him access to the joint checking account we used for household expenses. I had essentially handed him the keys to the kingdom and looked the other way while he looted the treasury. Not anymore. With a few decisive clicks, I initiated the lockout protocols. I changed the passwords to every single account. I removed his authorization from the credit lines. I set the daily withdrawal limit on the joint debit card to 0. One by one, the digital doors slammed shut. It felt like cutting off a gangrenous limb. It was painful, but absolutely necessary for survival. I watched the status bars turn from active to suspended, and I felt the first true breath of air fill my lungs in months. According to the tracker on his car, Terrence was already awake and moving. He was not heading to the fake office of Booker Media Group. He was heading to Phipps Plaza, which was the most upscale shopping center in Atlanta, and he was not alone. The audio feed from the car picked up Bianca's voice. She was complaining about the humidity and demanding they stop for smoothies before their appointment. They were going to Winston's Jewelers. I pulled up the security feed from the store. I knew the owner personally, having bought several pieces there for corporate gifts. The camera angle was perfect. I watched as Terrence strolled in with Bianca on his arm. He looked hungover but arrogant. His chest was puffed out in that way he did when he was about to spend money he did not earn. Bianca was pointing at the glass cases. Her eyes were scanning the diamonds like a predator scanning a herd. They stopped in front of the engagement rings. Terrence gestured to the sales associate. It was a young woman who looked intimidated by his bluster. He pointed to a massive yellow diamond ring in the center display. It was gaudy. It was loud. It was exactly the kind of ring a man buys when he is compensating for something. I checked the price list on my other screen. $80,000. He was going to try and put an $80,000 ring on my credit card less than 12 hours after his sister-in-law threw wine on me. The audacity was breathtaking. I watched him pull out the black card. He held it between two fingers and casually flipped it onto the glass counter. He said something to Bianca, and she giggled while leaning into him. She thought she had won. She thought she was minutes away from securing the bag. The sales associate swiped the card. She waited. She frowned. She swiped it again. She looked at the machine and then at the card and then at Terrence. She said something that made Terrence's smile drop. He laughed a nervous bark and told her to try it again. She did. The result was the same. Terrence's face turned a mottled red. He dug into his wallet and pulled out the Platinum Visa. He handed it over with a demand to run it immediately. Declined. He pulled out the debit card. Declined. My phone rang. It was Terrence. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I put on my calmest and most professional voice. It was the one I used for hostile board meetings. "Hello, Terrence. What the hell is going on?" He screamed into the receiver. His voice echoed in my office. "I am at Winston's trying to make a purchase and every single card is getting declined. You need to fix this right now. Open the cards back up, Simone. Do not play with me." I leaned back in my chair, twirling a pen in my fingers. I could hear the panic in his voice. It was the sheer terror of being exposed as a fraud in front of his mistress. "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that, Terrence," I said. My tone was smooth and devoid of emotion. "But I cannot open them. The bank's fraud department flagged some highly irregular activity on the accounts this morning. Given the security breach we discussed regarding the stolen files, I authorized a full system freeze." "What are you talking about?" he shouted. "What irregular activity?" "Well," I continued looking at the screen where he was sweating profusely. "There were attempts to purchase luxury goods that did not align with our approved household budget. The system is currently undergoing maintenance to audit all expenditures. It is a standard protocol for asset protection. I am sure you understand being a businessman and all." "Maintenance," he spluttered. "How long is maintenance going to take?" "I have a situation here, Simone. I really cannot say," I replied, checking my watch. "Audits can take weeks, especially when there are so many suspicious transactions to review. You might want to use your own money for now, babe. Surely a media mogul like you has cash reserves." I hung up the phone. I watched the screen. Terrence stared at his phone in disbelief. He turned to Bianca, who was standing with her arms crossed and her foot tapping impatiently. He tried to explain. He waved his hands. He pointed at the machine. He pulled out his pockets to show they were empty. Bianca's face transformed. The sweet and innocent assistant vanished. She was replaced by a woman who realized she was betting on a horse with a broken leg. She looked at the ring in the case, and then at Terrence. She said something sharp and cutting. I did not need audio to read her lips. "You are useless," she sneered. "You are just a leech." She turned on her heel with her hair whipping around and marched out of the store. She did not look back. Terrence stood there alone at the counter. The rejected credit cards were scattered on the glass like debris from a crash. He looked at the sales associate who was now looking at him with open pity. He snatched up his cards and ran after Bianca, leaving his dignity on the floor of the jewelry store. I arrived home that evening to find my driveway full of cars. It looked like a family reunion, but the atmosphere inside was more like a court-martial. Terrence had summoned the troops. He was sitting in the center of the living room on the white linen sofa I had bought 3 months ago. He was holding a glass of whiskey with a grip so tight his knuckles were white. Flanking him were Bernice and Darnell and Tiffany. They were not smiling. They were sitting with their arms crossed. Their faces were set in expressions of righteous indignation, as if they were the ones who had been wronged. When I walked through the door, the silence was immediate and heavy. It was an ambush, plain and simple. Terrence stood up first. He pointed a finger at me. His face was still flushed from the embarrassment at the jewelry store. "You have some explaining to do, Simone," he shouted. His voice bounced off the high ceilings. "You humiliated me today. You cut off my access. You made me look like a beggar in front of people who matter." I placed my bag on the console table and looked at him calmly. I did not raise my voice. I did not flinch. I simply asked what people mattered. Terrence, the sales clerk, or your mistress? He ignored the question and barreled forward with his narrative. "You are controlling. You are financially abusive. I called my mother because I cannot deal with your toxicity anymore." Bernice stood up then. She adjusted her dress as if she were preparing to deliver a sermon. She walked toward me with eyes that were cold and judging. She had never liked me, but tonight she looked at me with open contempt. "Simone," she began. Her voice was low and dangerous. "We need to have a serious talk about your role as a wife. You seem to have forgotten that a man is the head of the household. You might make the money, but Terrence is the king of this castle. You are emasculating him. You are treating him like a child with an allowance instead of the visionary he is." I almost laughed. A visionary who could not pay for a tank of gas without my card. But Bernice was just getting started. "Men need face, Simone," she continued, pacing in front of me. "They need respect. When you cut off his cards, you cut off his dignity. You are shaming him in the streets. A good wife builds her husband up. She does not tear him down. If you want this marriage to work, you need to fix the power imbalance." "And how do you propose I do that?" I asked. I was genuinely curious to hear the depths of their delusion. Bernice stopped and looked me dead in the eye. "You need to make him an equal partner, not just in name, but on paper. You need to transfer 50% of your company shares to Terrence, right now, tonight. He needs to be able to walk into any room and command respect as an owner, not just a husband. He needs to have his own wealth so he can lead this family properly. It is the only way he can hold his head high." I stared at her. She was demanding I hand over half of my life's work. She wanted half of the company I built from scratch given to a man who had just tried to buy an $80,000 ring for another woman. It was extortion wrapped in the language of tradition. Tiffany spoke up then. She was inspecting her nails and looking bored, but her words were the sharpest of them all. She looked up at me with a smirk playing on her lips. "Honestly, Simone, you should be grateful," she said. Her voice dripped with poison. "Look at you. You are always in those labs or in meetings. You look tired. You look old. Without Terrence, who would want you? You would just be a lonely and bitter old maid, sitting on a pile of money with no one to share it with. Terrence gave you status. He gave you a life. He made you look good. You are lucky he even picked you, considering his options." The room went quiet. They sat there smug and satisfied, waiting for me to break. They expected me to cry. They expected me to apologize and open my checkbook and beg for their forgiveness. They thought they had broken me down. They thought that by attacking my womanhood and my appearance and my worth, they could bully me into submission. I looked at Terrence, who was watching me with a triumphant sneer. He thought he had won. He thought his mother and his brother and his sister-in-law had successfully put me in my place. I felt a shift inside me. The last tether of obligation and the last thread of guilt finally snapped. I looked at the house I paid for. I looked at the furniture they were sitting on. I looked at the food they had likely raided from my kitchen. I looked at these people who contributed nothing but took everything. I stood up straighter. I did not cry. I did not yell. I felt a cold calm wash over me. It was a clarity that was sharp as a diamond. "So that is how it is," I said. My voice was steady. "You think I am nothing without him? You think I owe you my company and my dignity and my self-respect?" I walked over to the fireplace and picked up a framed photo of our wedding day. I looked at it for a moment. Then I set it face down on the mantel. "Okay," I said, turning back to face them. "You want equity. You want respect. You want to see what life looks like when I am not holding everyone up." I looked directly at Terrence. "You want a war. Terrence frowned, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "I just want what is fair, Simone," he said. Uncertainty crept into his voice. "Fair," I repeated. Interesting choice of word. I walked to the door and opened it. I looked back at the four of them sitting in my living room like a panel of judges. "Get out," I said. What Bernice asked, blinking. "Get out of my house," I said louder this time. "All of you. The meeting is over. You made your demands. Now I am making my move." Terrence stood up angry now. "You cannot kick us out. This is my house too. We will see about that," I said. "But for tonight, you are leaving. And Terrence, if you want a war, you have got one. But remember one thing, I do not lose." I held the door open and waited. They looked at each other confused and angry, but they saw the look in my eyes. They saw that the bank was closed. Slowly muttering curses and threats, they filed out into the night. They thought I was just throwing a tantrum. They thought I would call them in the morning to apologize. They had no idea that I was not just closing a door. I was closing a chapter. I did not wait for the sheriff to evict me. I packed my Louis Vuitton trunks with the calm precision of a woman who had planned her exit strategy months in advance. I left the furniture. I left the art. I left the heavy velvet drapes that Bernice loved so much. I took only my jewelry and my documents and my couture clothing. I called a private car and directed the driver to the St. Regis Hotel in Buckhead. I had reserved the penthouse suite. It was a sanctuary of cool marble and silence. Terrence thought he had won. His lawyer had filed an emergency motion for exclusive use of the marital residence pending the divorce hearing. He claimed I was creating a hostile environment. He wanted me out so he could play king of the castle. "Fine," I whispered as I watched the city skyline from my hotel balcony. "You can have the castle, but a castle is just a pile of bricks without a queen to keep the lights on." I pulled out my iPad and opened the smart home application. I looked at the utility settings. The electric bill and the water bill and the internet and the gas were all in my name. They were all set to autopay from my personal account. I canceled the autopay. Then I logged into the utility provider portals. I requested an immediate disconnect of services citing a move out. I scheduled the shutoff for 6 o'clock the following morning. I poured myself a glass of champagne and waited for the show to begin. The chaos started at dawn. I watched the infrared security feed from the master bedroom. The ambient lighting flickered and died. The low hum of the massive central air conditioning unit silenced instantly. The smart home panels on the walls went black. Down in the basement, the water main valve motorized and twisted shut with a mechanical finality. The high-speed fiber optic internet connection severed, leaving the house digitally isolated. Terrence woke up first. He tapped the smart panel next to the bed. It was dead. He grabbed his phone to check the house app, but there was no Wi-Fi. He stumbled out of bed and into the hallway. "It must be a neighborhood outage," he muttered. But the streetlights outside were still on. The neighbors' houses were humming with power. The outage was surgically precise. It was targeted solely at the Booker residence. The temperature inside the house began to rise. It was mid-July in Atlanta. The heat was a physical weight. Without the air conditioning, the Georgia humidity seeped through the walls, turning the mansion into a greenhouse. By 8 o'clock, it was already uncomfortable. By 9 o'clock, it was stifling. Then came the sound of heavy engines in the driveway. Terrence ran to the window. A fleet of tow trucks had pulled up to the front gate. There were 3 of them. They were big flatbed trucks with the logos of a repossession agency I owned through a shell company. Terrence threw open the front door and marched out in his silk boxers. "Hey!" he shouted at the lead driver. "Get away from those cars. This is private property." The driver did not even look up from his clipboard. He just pointed at the G-Wagon and the S-Class Mercedes and the Porsche. "Repossession order," he said flatly. "These vehicles are leased under Helix Innovations corporate fleet. The lease has been terminated due to unauthorized use by non-employees. Hand over the keys or we drag them out." "I am not a non-employee," Terrence screamed. His voice cracked. "I am the husband of the CEO. These are my cars." "Not according to the paperwork, pal," the driver said. He signaled his team. "Hook them up." Terrence stood barefoot on the hot pavement. He watched as the trucks loaded up the symbols of his status one by one. The G-Wagon was his pride and joy. It was hoisted onto the flatbed like a dead beast. The Porsche followed. Within 20 minutes, the driveway was empty. He was stranded. He walked back into the house defeated. The heat inside was now oppressive. The air was thick and stale. Bianca was waiting for him in the kitchen. She had come over early that morning thinking she was moving into her new palace. She did not look like a queen anymore. Her hair was frizzy from the humidity. Her makeup was running. She was wearing a look of pure venom. "You said you handled it," she hissed. "You said you were in charge. There is no water, Terrence. I cannot shower. I cannot charge my phone. And now you let them take the cars. How am I supposed to go to the spa?" "It is just a glitch, babe," Terrence stammered. He tried to touch her arm, but she recoiled. "Simone is doing this. She is trying to play games. I will call my lawyer. We will fix this." "Fix it." Bianca laughed. It was a cruel and mocking sound. "You cannot even buy a bottle of water right now. You are useless. I did not sign up for this. I did not sign up to sweat in the dark with a man who cannot pay his bills." By the second day, the house had descended into savagery. The temperature inside had reached 90 degrees. The smell was the first thing to break them. The massive sub-zero refrigerator had stopped running. The hundreds of dollars of organic meat and imported cheeses inside began to rot. The stench of spoilage filled the kitchen and drifted into the living room. Bernice was sitting at the kitchen table fanning herself with a magazine. She looked pale and haggard. She looked at her son. "Dante," she said. Her voice trembled. "I need a bath. I feel sticky. This is inhumane." Bianca was sitting across from her. She wrinkled her nose. "You stink," Bianca snapped. "You smell like old cheese. Can you please sit somewhere else?" Bernice gasped. "Excuse me, young lady. I am the matriarch of this family. You will show me respect." "Respect," Bianca scoffed. "Look around you, Bernice. You are sitting in a hot house with no food and no water. Your son is a loser who lied to us. There is nothing to respect here." Tiffany and Darnell walked into the kitchen. They looked desperate. Darnell was holding the last bottle of sparkling water from the pantry. Tiffany lunged for it. "Give it to me, Darnell," she screamed. "I am dehydrated. My throat is parched." "Get your own," Darnell shouted back, pushing her away. "I found it. It is mine." They wrestled for the bottle. It fell to the floor and shattered. The precious water spilled onto the tile. They both stared at the puddle in horror. Then Tiffany began to cry. It was not a cry of sadness. It was a cry of broken entitlement. I watched it all from the cool comfort of my hotel room. I watched them turn on each other. I watched the veneer of the Booker family crumble under the slightest pressure. They realized in the dark and the heat and the stench that they were nothing without me. I was the sun that kept their world warm. I was the gravity that held them together. And now that I was gone, they were just spinning into the void. The law offices of Morgan & Steele were located on the 45th floor of a glass tower downtown. It was a space designed to make you feel small the moment you stepped off the elevator. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing a charcoal gray suit that cost more than Terrence's yearly salary used to be. I sat at the head of the conference table with my hands folded and my expression unreadable. My lawyer Richard sat beside me. He was calm and collected while reviewing a file that was thicker than a phone book. Terrence arrived 10 minutes late. He looked like a man who had been dragged backward through a hedge. His suit was wrinkled, and his eyes were bloodshot. He smelled faintly of stale alcohol and desperation. The 72 hours without water or air conditioning had clearly taken their toll. He was flanked by his new lawyer. His name was Cohen. He had a reputation for being loud and aggressive and morally flexible. They sat down opposite us. Cohen slammed his briefcase onto the mahogany table with a theatrical thud. "Let us cut to the chase," Cohen started. He leaned forward. "My client is willing to make this easy for you, Mrs. Booker. We know you have assets. We know Helix Innovations is about to close a major deal. The last thing you need right now is a messy public divorce dragging your stock price down." Terrence leaned back in his chair. He crossed his arms, trying to look like he held the cards. "That is right, Simone," he said. His voice was a mixture of arrogance and pleading. "I know how you operate. You hate bad press. You hate drama. So here is the deal. You give me $100 million cash. You sign over the deed to the Buckhead mansion, and you reinstate my credit lines. In exchange, I will sign the divorce papers quietly. No press and no scandal. Just a clean break. I did not blink. I did not speak. I just looked at him. I looked at the man who had vowed to love and cherish me and saw only a parasite looking for a new host. Cohen continued, sensing my silence as weakness. And if you refuse, we are prepared to go to the press. We have stories, Mrs. Booker. Stories about your erratic behavior. Stories about unsafe working conditions at your labs. We will claim you are running a sweatshop. We will paint you as a fraud and a tyrant. By the time we are done, Helix Innovation stock will be worth less than the paper it is printed on. I looked at my watch. It was a vintage Patek Philippe. I watched the second hand sweep around the face. Tick, tick, tick. I did not say a word. I did not look at Cohen. I kept my eyes fixed on Terrence, studying him like a specimen under a microscope. The silence stretched out, filling the room and becoming heavy and suffocating. Terrence's smirk began to falter. He shifted in his chair. He looked at Cohen, then back at me. "Say something," he snapped. His voice lost its bravado. "Stop looking at me like that." I continued to stare. I saw the sweat bead on his upper lip. I saw the twitch in his left eye. He was terrified. He was bluffing with an empty hand, and he knew that I knew it. He expected me to fight. He expected emotion. My silence was a language he did not speak. Richard closed his file with a soft snap. He stood up and buttoned his jacket. "Gentlemen," he said. His voice was calm and professional. "My client has heard your proposal, and her answer is no." "No." Terrence shouted. He stood up so fast his chair tipped over. "You cannot just say no. I will ruin you, Simone. I swear to God I will burn everything down." Richard did not even look at him. He looked at Cohen with a thin and shark-like smile. "We decline all demands. We will not be paying a settlement. We will not be transferring any property. And as for your threats of defamation, I would advise you to be very careful. We have evidence that would make any public statement by your client extremely ill-advised." "Evidence?" Terrence scoffed. "What evidence? You have nothing." Richard gestured for me to stand. I rose gracefully, smoothing my jacket. Richard looked Terrence dead in the eye. "See you in court, Mr. Booker. And remember to prepare bail money." Terrence froze. Bail money. The words hung in the air like smoke. He did not understand yet. But he would. Oh, he would. The courtroom was silent except for the hum of the projector as the screen flickered to life. The image was crisp and vivid. The colors were saturated in high definition. It was a night scene. The water of Lake Lanier reflected the lights of the marina. In the center of the frame was a yacht. It was sleek and expensive and rocking gently against the dock. A banner was strung between the masts. The letters were large enough to be read clearly, even from the back of the courtroom. "Happy 25th birthday to our future." Terrence let out a strangled noise. It was half gasp and half groan. He gripped the edge of the defense table. His knuckles were white. He knew what was coming. He had lived it. He had thought he was safe in the shadows of the lake, surrounded by his sycophants and his secrets. He had no idea he was starring in a documentary of his own demise. The video zoomed in. There was Terrence wearing a linen suit I had paid for, holding a glass of champagne I had paid for. He was laughing. His head was thrown back in that carefree way he never showed me anymore. Next to him was Bernice, dancing with a glass in her hand. She looked more alive than she ever did at my dinner table. Tiffany and Darnell were there too, clinking glasses and eating hors d'oeuvres. It was a party. It was a celebration. And the guest of honor was standing right next to my husband. It was Bianca. She was wearing the tiara. She was glowing under the deck lights, looking up at Terrence with adoring eyes. The camera captured every detail, the way he leaned in close to whisper in her ear, the way his hand rested possessively on the small of her back, the way she giggled and brushed a piece of lint off his lapel. It was intimate. It was comfortable. It was the behavior of a couple who had been together for a long time. Then came the timestamp. It appeared in the bottom corner of the screen. It was bold and white. October 15th, 8:45 in the evening. Judge Mercer looked from the screen to the document in her hand. She checked the date on the signature page of the post-nuptial agreement. October 15th. She looked back at the screen. "Mr. Booker," the judge said. Her voice cut through the silence like a knife. "Is this the shareholder meeting you were attending? Is this the work that kept you late?" Terrence stood up, knocking his chair over. "That is not what it looks like," he stammered. Sweat poured down his face. "That was a business function. She is a client. We were networking. It was a launch party. A launch party for your future," the judge read from the banner on the screen. Interesting branding for a client. Cohen looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. He closed his file. He knew it was over. He knew he had been lied to, and he knew there was no defense for this level of stupidity. But I was not done. I signaled Richard again. He pressed a button on the remote. The video cut to a new clip. This one was different. It was not taken from a distance. It was taken from inside my home office. The angle was high, looking down from the ceiling. It was the footage from the hidden camera in the smoke detector. The timestamp read, October 22nd, 1 week after the yacht party. The screen showed Terrence creeping into my office. It showed him fumbling with the lock. It showed him walking to the safe. It showed him typing in the code. 042299, Bianca's birthday. The courtroom watched in fascinated horror as Terrence opened the safe and pulled out the file labeled Project Ether. They watched him pull out his phone. They watched him photograph page after page of confidential documents. They watched him smile as he texted his mistress that he had secured the bag. Terrence sank back into his chair, burying his face in his hands. A collective gasp went through the gallery. This was not just adultery anymore. This was corporate espionage. This was a felony. Judge Mercer took off her glasses. She looked at Terrence with an expression of pure disgust. "You signed a contract waiving your rights if you committed fraud or adultery," she said. Her voice was low and dangerous, and here you are on video committing both. You stole from your wife, you cheated on your wife, and you lied to this court. She turned to me. "Mrs. Booker, do you have anything else to add?" I stood up. "Yes, Your Honor. I have one more thing." I pointed to the screen. The video of the yacht party was playing again on a loop. It had reached the moment of the fireworks. The sky lit up with red and gold explosions. Under the light, Terrence dipped Bianca and kissed her. It was not a business kiss. It was not a friendly peck. It was a deep and passionate embrace. The judge laughed. It started as a chuckle and grew into a full-blown laugh of disbelief. She shook her head, wiping a tear from her eye. "Mr. Booker," she said, composing herself, "you truly are a piece of work. You signed your death warrant on the same day you threw yourself a going-away party. I am issuing a summary judgment. The court awards full ownership of all marital assets, including the Buckhead estate and the investment portfolio and the entirety of Helix Innovations, shares to the plaintiff, Simone Booker. The defendant is entitled to nothing. Furthermore, the defendant is ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $500,000 for the misappropriated business loan, as well as $75,000 in unauthorized credit card expenditures." Terrence looked as though he had been struck by lightning. His mouth hung open. He was not just broke, he was buried. But the day was not over. As the judge finished her ruling, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. 3 men walked in. They were not wearing the expensive suits of private practice lawyers. They wore the dark functional suits of law enforcement. They were detectives from the Economic Crimes Unit. They walked past the gallery and stopped directly behind Terrence. One of them placed a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Terrence Booker," he said, "please stand up." Terrence stood. His legs were shaking so badly he had to lean against the table for support. "What is this?" he whispered. "We are not here about the divorce, Mr. Booker. We are here about this document you signed on October 22nd. You signed a confession stating your intent to distribute confidential intellectual property to a competitor. And thanks to the video evidence provided by your wife, we have visual confirmation of you committing the act. You are under arrest for corporate espionage and grand larceny and fraud." The detective spun him around. The metallic rasp of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud in the silent room. Bernice, who had been watching in stunned silence, let out a sound like a dying animal. Her eyes rolled back in her head, and she crumpled sideways, sliding off the bench and hitting the floor with a heavy thud. It was not a performance this time. The shock of seeing her golden child in chains had been too much for her heart. Pandemonium broke out. Bianca stood up abruptly, grabbing her bag and trying to shuffle toward the side exit, but she found her path blocked by two uniformed officers. Her phone buzzed in her hand. She looked down at the screen. It was an email notification from Apex Biocorp. It was a termination notice signed by Marcus Sterling. I had sent the video of her accepting the stolen files directly to her father. He was a ruthless man who tolerated ambition, but despised failure and liability. He disowned her on the spot. He cut her off from the family trust and barred her from the property. She was left standing on the sidewalk with nothing but her handbag and a looming criminal investigation. The Booker family was finished. My forensic accountants traced every dollar Terrence had siphoned from my accounts to fund their lifestyle. I filed a civil suit for conversion and unjust enrichment. They sold their house. They sold their cars. They liquidated their retirement funds to pay me back. I watched as the bailiff led Terrence away. He looked back at me one last time. His eyes were pleading, but I just smoothed the fabric of my skirt and watched the justice system work. Checkmate. I stood on the limestone terrace of the main house, looking out over 40 acres of rolling vines in Napa Valley. The air here was different. It smelled of earth and old oak and absolute freedom. Buying a vineyard had been a dream, I whispered to myself in the back of a city bus years ago. Today, it was my reality. I poured a glass of the estate's finest Cabernet Sauvignon. The deep red liquid swirled in the crystal, catching the light of the setting sun. It reminded me of the wine Tiffany had thrown on my white dress at the gala. Back then, it was a mark of humiliation. Now, it was the color of my victory. I took a slow and deliberate sip, savoring the complexity of the notes. It tasted like justice. Terrence had stood in court and declared that he intended to live off my fortune for the rest of his life. In a poetic twist of fate, he was absolutely right. For the next 10 years, he would be living in a federal prison cell that was funded in part by the substantial taxes I paid on my earnings. He was living on my dime just like he wanted. Only the accommodations were significantly less comfortable than the guest house he tried to give to his mistress. Let this be a lesson to anyone who thinks they can use people as stepping stones. Never underestimate a black woman who built an empire with her own two hands. We know how to build foundations that last, and we know exactly how to demolish the trash that tries to clutter our lives. We do not just survive betrayal, we monetize it, and we outgrow it. I smiled, letting the last of the tension leave my shoulders. The sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of violet and gold. I turned my back on the shadows of the past and walked toward the light, ready for whatever came next. Life taught me that your value isn't defined by who you support, but by who supports you when the tables turn. We often carry dead weight out of loyalty, calling it family or love, while it's simply parasitism draining our spirit. True empowerment comes when you stop apologizing for your success and start protecting your peace. Don't be afraid to cut off the anchors dragging you down, even if they share your last name. Reclaim your throne, own your brilliance. And remember, the best revenge isn't anger. It's living a life so beautiful that their absence becomes irrelevant.